Hi, and welcome back. Our next session is about innovation at utilities. But before we talk about the future, it is imperative that we address the historic and deadly wildfires burning across the western United States. Half of the 16 wildfires currently burning in the western states are the size of Chicago or bigger. The numbers put the situation unfolding along the West Coast into perspective as California, Oregon, Washington State are seeing wildfires that have burned faster and farther than ever before, blanketing large swaths of the United States with a thick smoke. In California, wildfires have destroyed more than 4,000 buildings and engulfed 3.3 million acres of land, an area greater than the size of the state of Connecticut. Oregon and Washington have been hit extremely hard as well. Over 1 million acres have burned in Oregon, compared with 680,000 in Washington state. In some parts of Oregon, the air quality has been so hazardous that it has gone beyond the state scale of air quality index. This year's fire season has scorched more than 7,000 square miles or over 4.4 million acres in 3 states. That's the equivalent to the state of New Jersey. At Z-Prime, we don't share these statistics to try to sensationalize the impact of climate change. It's real. We try to say these stats to put into perspective the monumental task our industry is facing to build a sustainable and future. And importantly, to recognize the work that utility professionals are doing around the clock to keep people safe during this year's multiple crises. With those comments in mind, I am really honored to turn the conversation over to Bryce Yonker, CEO of Smart Grid, as he leads us through a discussion about the fires, not necessarily about the fires, but about what's happening in innovation in the Northwest. Bryce, I turn it over to you.
Thanks, Chris. I know you're going to pull some slides up that I couldn't help but bring up to share. So this will be a little bit raw, but for those who have not been seeing the news, a bit of an update from the left side of the country. As Chris said, I'm Bryce Yonker, CEO. I run an organization called Grid Forward. But before we dive into our conversation today, really around innovation and equity, I wanted to share a little bit of update. So these 3 photos, that's the photo, are 3 photos from a town that I frequent quite often. It's a town called Detroit, Oregon. It's in the Santiam Valley here in the center part of the state. Complete devastation. So if people hadn't followed the news or seen what was happening so far, there are entire communities that have almost been wiped off the map. The center picture here is Main Street, Detroit, Oregon. Really apocalyptic and still very raw for me. I was through this town about 6 hours before this happened last Monday. So still feeling the impacts of what something like this means for communities. Certainly I don't live there, so my heart goes out to all these places, but it is a place I have a personal connection to. On the next slide, this is a photo of some of those fires that Chris had talked about. On the right side, that's the entire county of Clackamas County. A couple days ago, in red was everybody that had evacuated, in yellow getting into the outskirts of Portland, telling people to get ready to evacuate. You can see huge swaths of the entire county gone. On the right side of the screen, you're getting into Central Oregon. So to give you some perspective, this burned from the east flank of the Cascades almost all the way into the Willamette Valley. And along the way of the route that I was on, Idana, Detroit, Mill City, Gates, all of these communities were almost entirely taken down. Emeka and I talked on Friday. Between Friday and today, the air quality where I am here in Portland has been the worst in the world. We've been somewhere around 350 typically, which is extremely hazardous. We're still at the top of that list. We're glad to be heading in the right direction, but still at 250 is pretty unfathomable. And the last slide here gives a bit of personal perspective. This is a photo of what I'm actually pretty much looking at right now. You can see the sun is very red. It's pretty rough. And it's so bad that I'm fortunate enough to live in a home. We have air filtration, but we put this together outside of my kids' room, and in the last 2 days, you can see the sort of particulate that fan has caught. And this is where it starts to get real personal. This last photo, she's normally very chipper, but I just snapped it of her. This is my beautiful 8-year-old, and her, she's breaking out into hives. So the reality of what happens to a climate is something that I'm feeling very much right now. And thanks for sharing those slides, Chris. But I'm really happy to have in conversation with me today, Emeka, a good friend with a great and important role with the utility up there just a bit north of me in Seattle. So Emeka, maybe for our first question as we dive in, I shared a little bit there about what I've been going through these last few days here in the Oregon area. How are you doing up there in Seattle?
Well, thanks, Bryce. And yeah, I mean, I think as the slides that you showed earlier will demonstrate, of course, Seattle was number 3 on that list. So certainly faring a bit better than you all are down there in Portland, but by no means feeling particularly sort of secure. I think we're weathering it okay. We've all been stuck indoors for several days, like you all have as well. Right here where I am, I live in a suburb south of the city, and we had a fire, an actual, one of the fires called the Sumner Grade Fire that was burning less than 30 miles away from my house. So as I was telling you earlier, my wife and I did have the conversation about what it would look like if we had to get our stuff and the kids and get out of Dodge. So this is very, very real. And I think one of the things that has resonated for me as I've listened to some of the talk about the fires over the last few days, and as I think about it really in the context of the work that we're about here at City Light with respect to decarbonization, is someone made a statement about, when we have conversations about the cost of combating climate change, and we talk about, what is it going to cost? Is it worth the cost? And the question is, compared to what? Compared to this? Right. The reality is, of course, if we knew things that we could do to save a town like Detroit from going through the devastation that they are, we would. And I'm sure we would spare no expense. So I think this is very real, and it brings a lot of meaning to the work that we're doing around decarbonization and thinking about what are the ways that we need to engage to combat what is a increasingly apparent and increasingly certainly urgent climate crisis. So
yeah,
we're doing okay, but certainly feeling the pinch.
Yeah. So Emeka, your Chief Resources and Innovation Officer, can you maybe share a little bit about what that entails, and then how it relates to the overall strategies and priorities that City Light is laying out there at the utility?
Sure. Yeah. Here at City Light, Seattle City Light, we've really taken I suppose it's somewhat novel in terms of the approach that we've taken to how we've decided to look to the future. And so my role is one that we created with that strategy in mind, and it's designed to sort of bridge our strategy across from sort of all of our resources, supply resources, generation assets, and those kinds of things, all the way to sort of the user end of things, right? And you start talking about grid modernization, you're talking about electrification and customer programs, and sort of to bring those all together in one chain. Now, certainly, one of the things that we're doing here at City Light is working really hard at breaking down silos and staying away from sort of siloed thinking. And so it's very matrixed. We're using a very matrixed approach. There's a lot of partnership and collaboration across the utility, but we are trying to lead the utility in the direction that prepares us for the future. We hear terms like utility of the future, and certainly there are a lot of things that go into that term. I think the things that are top of mind when you hear that term are only a fraction of what it actually takes to be the service provider of the future.
So let's jump into it. Let's dive into where you and I had wanted to take this conversation, and I'll pose this question, and I'm really excited to hear about your thoughts around it. Really, I want to focus the majority of our discussion around this topic of how can progress on innovation help create the outcomes that our communities are asking us for. So when you think about advancements on the grid and you think about bringing deeper functionality onto our electrical system, how can that help bring outcomes that communities are looking for, outcomes that relate to equity, outcomes that relate to affordability and access, and these sorts of things that you all are certainly feeling, very much at, being a municipal utility, you guys are very close to the interests of the community. So what would your thoughts be around this topic?
Yeah, thank you for that. I think you started to lead into it there, right? Our role at Seattle City Light as a municipal utility, certainly in the pantheon of utility structures, sort of governance structures, puts us in a pretty unique place. And we are a larger municipal, which means we ask very, very interesting considerations. But basically, we have one purpose in life, right? And one purpose in existence, and that is to provide a service to the community. And so it really crystallizes our mission in a way that simplifies a little bit our thought process around how we approach innovation and how we approach the work that we're doing. And I think the best way for me to start out sort of describing that is really to talk about how we think of our utility, and our utility in our mind is a community asset, right? We are sort of what's known as a customer owned or a community owned utility, right? And so if you think of it like any other individual or entity owning an asset, the asset exists to service the needs of the owner, right? So we exist to service the needs of our customer owners. And so the way we think about our work certainly is that because this is a community-owned asset, the benefits of our community-owned asset have to accrue to our entire community. And certainly we have to be attentive to our responsibility as a community to not only address and sort of mitigate, but really begin to reverse the effects of historic inequities in a whole variety of sectors. And so as we think about our work in grid modernization and electrification, we are working really hard to think deeply and continually about how we make sure that work is designed to begin to promote outcomes that address some of those inequities and do what we can to reverse some of those longstanding impacts. We've been very passionate and very outspoken about continuously reaching out to our community and having a strong ethos of community engagement in doing our work, engaging directly with the community. I was on a community engagement call just yesterday evening, listening to some members of one of our neighborhoods about transportation electrification and hearing what their needs are and how this is going to impact them and hearing what their concerns are about those things. And so we're certainly very much trying to do that. We're thinking about sort of how the system is built. I think, one of the cornerstones of our approach has been a belief that, as a lot of the certainly technical experts will say, and I'm sure have talked about throughout the last couple of days of ETS, the architecture of the system, the delivery system for electrical energy is changing and will change. And so part of what we have to think about is sort of architecture models that help us manage the cost of this journey of electrification that we're on. Because the reality is, of course, simply going after it with fixed assets in the sort of the legacy way the industry has done is cost prohibitive and would be cost prohibitive for our ratepayers. So we've got to think differently, think more flexibly, think more innovatively to find ways to do both things at the same time and to allow this asset really to pay off for the people who own it.
And to peel that onion back just a little bit, as folks in this event well know, the interest and the opportunity to have the early adopters have access to some of the interesting whiz bang solutions on the grid obviously has disproportionately fallen to people that have the wherewithal to get those solutions, whether it's electric vehicles or storage at their homes or on-site generation or resiliency solutions. So when you think about opportunities for more disadvantaged and more heavily impacted communities to have access to some of these outcomes, what are you guys trying to prioritize? Where are you trying to make sure that the benefits and the promise of a modernized infrastructure system really do reach the people that need them the most?
Again, another great question. I mean, it's systemic and structural, right? So I think if you go at something like this with sort of a hodgepodge of individual ideas, I think you get stuck in sort of a catch-22 a little bit. And so instead, what we've tried to do is sort of to take a step back and sort of look at the big picture outcomes, right? And so, for example, when we talk about transportation electrification, one of the things that we have sort of put a stake in the ground on is prioritizing transit. And the reason for that is because we've been told, and I don't think we are dissimilar from many large metro areas in the country in this, what we've been told continually is that for those populations, for our historically disadvantaged populations, Black and Indigenous and other people of color, for immigrants and for people for whom English is not their first language, for those communities, the most impactful mode of transportation that would impact their lifestyle, impact how they live their daily lives and take care of their families is access to transit. More routes, more options at more times of the day, and clean, right? Because again, many of these communities are near the major arterials where these heavy duty transit modes of transit sort of travel. And so clean electric forms of transportation has that double whammy. It has the emissions impact in their neighborhoods, and it provides them access to transportation options that are affordable and convenient. And so it's doing stuff like that. And so when we think about grid architecture, you think about, what are the costs to connect to the grid, right? And so the more expensive our architecture is, you think about sort of connection costs for people wanting to get onto the grid with a new electric piece of equipment or increasing their demand, and what do those charges end up being for them? A more flexible grid that has a better ability to integrate these new uses certainly becomes more cost effective for them and ultimately helps keep the cost of rates down for all of our ratepayers. And so again, it really is not just thinking about solutions, which we certainly do, right? And so we're working on programs around community solar, and we have a program, we're piloting a program for in-home electric vehicle charging. And in doing these programs, by the way, we are making sure that we are holding space for our low-income customers and our other customers in demographics that have been historically disadvantaged, so that they can participate in these pilot programs. We have pilots now around affordability. We have a pilot around that we're working on around time of day usage, things like that really begin to impact the whole system that affects our customers. And so I think for us, it also becomes an exercise also in recognizing where traditional or historic sort of business models have created what are probably in a lot of cases unintended consequences, but they are real consequences. And so we have to address them, and we have to look for ways to reverse them. I think we will continue to see also, as we move into broader electrification around buildings, we will continue to see opportunities to partner with customers for low-income pilots around home electrification and smart homes. I think that's probably a growing area that we will be interested in. So there is a lot both on the individual side, but I think where the rubber meets the road for us is the sort of the systemic solutions that really begin to transform the whole structure of how people access and use energy.
And I hear that listening has been very key to make sure that the solutions you're bringing are the right ones. So digging a little bit further yet still, how do we make effective progress towards racial equity outcomes? So you've touched on the fact that some of these communities have been systemically disadvantaged and have been impacted by the way we structure our grid. How do we make progress in heading in the right direction with some of these solution areas?
It really starts by like any sort of so I'm an engineer by sort of classical training, if you will. And so as a solution finder in that discipline, it starts by defining the problem and sort of acknowledging the problem, right? And so we cannot address historic racial inequity without acknowledging that it is a real thing. And certainly there are deep and long-standing racial and structurally racist things that have happened in our community. And so we've started by sort of being very real about those things, by really acknowledging sort of some of the things that have happened that have disadvantaged communities and have created structural barriers for communities in accessing services. And so like I talked about transit, I think you begin to think about how we approach things like distributed energy resources, how we approach things like siting of facilities, right? Our focus, one of the other focuses, for example, of our transportation electrification has been around large fleets. Again, large fleets of vehicles that travel the most miles, that dump the most emissions, again, through these major arterial thoroughfares, mostly disproportionately on these communities of color. That needs to be a priority for us, because again, if you're really serious about addressing that history, then it really starts by trying to reverse those impacts. I think for us, at the end of the day, the most powerful thing, though, is, like I said, it's acknowledging that BIPOC communities have been disproportionately disadvantaged by the structure of the way things work, and making sure that we center that in all of our conversations around the decarbonization transition.
Are there some ways that you all are thinking about specifically targeting the solution to these communities, whether it might be EE or demand side offerings, special customer service automation or solutions, maybe microgrids around resiliency, or how you get how you get undesirable electrical components out of disadvantaged communities that might impact home values, and all these sorts of things that could be addressed. How are you all thinking about that list of kind of that toolkit of things that could be used?
I think it's a little bit of all that. I think we're looking at sort of opportunities again to create ownership for some of these distributed energy assets amongst those communities. I think we've really again focused on the large emissions footprints. One of those for us in the city of Seattle is the port and the waterfront, right? And so we've entered into some partnerships and work to help support and help accelerate the Port of Seattle's ambitious plan to electrify its operations. Again, that is located in a community that has been disadvantaged in a lot of different layered ways, but that facility being there is one of them. And so electrifying that facility can have an outsized impact for that community. But again, beginning to engage, for example, with transportation network company drivers, right? So your Ubers and Lyfts and things like that. Many of those, really most of those, the majority of those operators are people of color and people from these disadvantaged communities. And so, again, engaging with that community, making it a focus and a part of our transportation electrification strategy is another way that you begin to sort of address those things and have targeted solutions. Because I think that's what it is, right? We have to be willing to acknowledge the issue, really address where those impacts are showing up, and then attack them at the source. And I think when you do that, if you focus on outcome instead of process, but focus on what do we want to see happen? We want to see less emissions in these communities. We want to see these communities have access to flexible and dynamic and automated grid. And we want them to be able to stay where they are when those things come. And so, anti-displacement is a really key. We're engaged and working hard with our city Department of Planning and Urban Development to make sure that as we build these programs, we are embedding anti-displacement strategies within them so that, when we make these investments, those communities don't get sort of, gentrified out of their homes. So again, if you think about those solutions systemically, because a lot of this inequity has been widely discussed since the summer, are systemic, right? They are not individual impacts. These are things that are systems and structures that have been built up over decades, centuries, really, to create the situation we encounter today. And so we have to attack them at the root, and we have to be diligent and certainly very persistent and consistent in addressing them and continuing to engage on them.
So Emeka, you are a Black leader in the industry. You bring yourself to to your role every day. With that background, what does that mean for you? What do you think needs addressing within the industry to bring deeper diversity, to bring better outcomes, to bring the progress that we all know is needed?
Well, there's a lot in that question, obviously, and I could spend a lot of time talking about that. But I think it really is, again, my perspective and worldview, I think, is where it starts, right? I mean, I think about our problem statements and our solution sets from the perspective of someone who certainly has a very deep and personal connection to being a person of color in society. I'm very lucky and very fortunate to be a leader in the industry, and so I have privilege in a lot of different ways. But it certainly is also true that when I'm out for a run, not now with the air quality, but when the air quality allows for it, nobody knows that I work at Seattle City Light, and so recognizing those things and then trying to build an organization for us that is thoughtful about equity and about the ways we as a city agency really can be anti-racist in our work is sort of part of the perspective that I bring to it, right? Because I think it is very true and very clear that for a wide variety of different reasons, people who look like me in a lot of ways aren't certainly a high demographic in roles like mine. And so, I'm also really passionate because of that about opportunity, right? And certainly in our work at City Light, and as we think about how we attract and source and retain and develop talent, I think a lot about how do we create opportunity for people of color and for women and for immigrants, and how do we make our work and our workplace a welcoming place for people of all shades and backgrounds to participate, to feel valued, to contribute, and to really bring their full selves to work every day. And I think that this pandemic, if it's taught us nothing, it's certainly that we're all connected in ways that we all don't even begin to acknowledge on a day-to-day basis. And so for me as a Black man in energy, it really drives my perspective in every conversation I have, from conversations about the evolution of resources in the West and carbon policy and environmental impacts of generation resources, all the way down to rate redesign discussions and customer programs, right? It's that whole spectrum, and thinking about how do these things affect, where are the places where if we are not careful, we will have disproportionate impacts on the people least able to bear them. And that's something that we we think deeply about, and that I certainly try to help us as an organization think deeply about every time we encounter a problem that we're trying to solve. And so
Yeah.
it's certainly a very fortunate position to be in, and I feel privileged to be able to contribute in that way.
Well, it's probably as appropriate a place to wrap up as any, but I did have the final question, which I knew I was going to ask you. So we'll ask one last question here. As you look out to the near future, however you want to draw those boundaries, what area are you maybe most worried about, or that most concerns you around this two-part issue, where advancement of grid functionality may impact the opportunity for equitable outcomes? So, what one area kind of worries you the most and concerns you the most? And then on the flip side of that, what area really are you most optimistic or even maybe most excited about?
I would say probably the place that I am most concerned about, that drives sort of the most anxiety for me, I think, is just about the focus on the grid and the level of granularity with which we have that conversation. I think there are lots of conversations that sort of nod to the idea that the grid is still the glue that holds it all together, regardless of how distributed your system is. It's sort of the linchpin in the middle. But those conversations often don't get into the detail of what it will take to invest in that system and to center that system as a priority. And so, I worry a lot about what I describe as a tiered energy system. And so when you think about sort of the impacts of things like, for example, rolling blackouts in California, I think, the places where the lights stay on in some of those communities are certainly not going to be the lowest income parts of those communities. And so when we think about even big picture, right? As we're having conversations, and I'm engaged in conversations about the greater evolution of the grid, big grid now, not just the local grid in the West. I think a lot about that, and then that works its way down into our transmission and distribution systems, obviously, because at the end of the day, what we want to be able to have as we transition this grid architecture is really a distribution system that is capable and has the flexibility and the smarts to integrate all of these new uses and these new resources. And I worry a lot that we won't make the investment, and that ultimately that tiered energy system will come to bear, and there will be haves and have-nots. And I don't think that would be a good outcome for society in general. And so it's something that I think that we should all really be very thoughtful about. On the positive side, certainly, again, as an engineer, I'm enthusiastic and sort of excited about innovation. I can't begin to tell you how blown away I am by some of the folks that I listen to. I've gotten the opportunity to listen to here at ETS, but in other forums, who are coming up with just these crazy, incredible, creative solutions to some of these problems, who are creating opportunity upon opportunity for even some of our most disadvantaged customers to really participate in this new energy economy. I'm excited about the opportunity for us to create really a whole new sector of clean energy jobs. That's something that we've talked a lot about here in Seattle, and we're working really hard with a few partners on, folks like Emerald Cities and others who have done really great work in that space. And I'm excited about the prospects that new, well-paying, sustainable, long-term careers can have in some of these communities. There are certainly statistics out there that talk a lot about what a stable, good income can do for the legacy of families over generations, right? And so I'm very excited about where that conversation is going and what we might be able to do from a workforce perspective and creating opportunity in our communities.
Well, Emeka, thank you for being on with me. It's always a pleasure to talk with you. Seattle City Light's fortunate to have you shaping the direction there. The region's fortunate, and the industry's fortunate to have your very thoughtful leadership, not only driving innovation and modernization ahead, but some of these really front of mind topics around progress in our society and the role that utilities in the electric sector plays in it. So, thanks for your insights today and for being on and sharing them with us.
Sure. Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure, obviously, for you and I to talk. We chat a lot, but I am really honored to sort of have a forum like this to talk about these things. I think these are important conversations. Again, you know, the last 6 months have been maybe the best teacher any of us could have about how interconnected we all are, and I hope that we have more of these conversations and sort of have unafraid engagement that allows us to dig into some of those connections.
And here's for hoping those westerlies start coming and clearing out our air and stomping down those fires a little bit.
Yeah, we'll all keep our fingers crossed on that, Bryce.
It's been delayed. Yeah, take care. Thanks, Emeka.
All right, thank you.